I'm not going to do a deep dive, like a technical deep dive today. We'll talk more strategy, but we'll get into a few strategies and ways that can help you defend, justify, and maximize the impact of every euro you're spending in the cloud. Briefly about me, as I said, I'm Sam, I'm a Tam, but I've been doing this cloud thing for a little over 10 years now and doing a lot of FinOps stuff in that time. In fact, FinOps didn't even exist when I started doing it. We called it other things, and then the organization came along, and I think it was 2019. I'm originally from Australia and now based in Germany. And that means that I don't speak very good German, and my temptation is to speed up during these presentations. So even if it's an internet problem or if whatever it is, if you can't understand me for whatever reason, please just raise your hand and ask me to slow down or something, whatever needs to happen. If it's the sound quality I said, if I accidentally become a bit too Australian somewhere through the discussions here. As Martin already mentioned, I do like to be quite informal in these sessions and keep things interactive. So please do feel free just to click the raise hand and ask a question. You can try also in the chat. I probably won't see it. But yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and ask questions and keep it interactive. So what I want to cover today is to go through, firstly, understanding the problem as I see it, and focusing then on the end goal, where we want to get to, which I am calling Nirvana, which is possibly a little bit of an overshoot, but hopefully that's where we can all go. We'll challenge some assumptions on FinOps and introduce the pillars of a streamlined model that we call intent-aware FinOps. We'll walk through some of the actions you can take to get there. I'll go through a customer of mine and what they did to get there, some pretty cool results. Talk briefly about how DoiT and tools can accelerate your journey, and leave some time at the end for questions, of course. My goal is to give you the tools and strategies to reframe FinOps as a business lever for your business. And if you think that a question might help add to that, then please do just throw your hand up and ask. So I'm sure you've all had this situation, this scenario. The product or DevOps team have said that they optimize something, and the finance team have come along and said, but the bill's gone up, right? And we end up in this situation where we're deploying new things in the cloud every month. We're taking advantage of the way the cloud should work, but it's just not quite working out the way we need it. Now, when I see this particular kind of situation, alarm bells start ringing. When they optimize some apps, what focus did they have on that optimization? Are they optimizing for cost? Was it for security or performance, for compliance? Lots of things you can optimize for. Let's just take the assumption, because we're talking with the accounting team here, that it was for cost. It's quite possible they've done a really great job. But what happens when that usage changes or when the commitments expire? Have they considered what will happen in 6 months' time? Have they got an optimization process to pick it up later? Or are they going to have to do it again because no one was looking at it? A lot of companies measure their cloud efficiency based on the dollars they're passing on to a cloud company at the end of each month. And if that bill's going up, then it must be a bad thing, right? More money going to Amazon or Google or Oracle or whoever you're sending it to. And that could be the case. If everything else has remained the same and the bill's going up, that's probably a bad thing. But if everything else is staying the same and the bill goes down, then the corollary, that must be a good thing, right? Well, maybe, probably. Let's have a little bit of a look. I think the problem and the reason that we're all surprised by cloud bills is actually down to a lack of information. I'm old enough, and I guess some of you are too, to started working in an on-prem world when we had long procurement cycles. Right? I had to fight for every extra gigabyte of RAM or RAID controller or whatever I needed, every single line on that invoice. It made budgets really easy to follow because you got it once and that was it. And it was easy to defend too. There was no extra spend. But now in the cloud, we can deploy or scale in a heartbeat. We can do it without really thinking about it. We know that we need to do something to improve our app. And sometimes it's just easier to throw hardware at it, just double the size of an instance or a database or whatever it is. Imagine going back to that on-prem world and having to wait 6 months for that bigger server to arrive. Well, you're probably going to find another way to do it or figure out some improvement in your systems. So coming back to our cloud bill, we know there's a reason for it, but we don't know what that reason is. It could be that the marketing team ran a promotion that's driven more users to our platform. or that we've deployed some new feature that turned our regular app into a killer app. Maybe one of the team made a typo and deployed a test database cluster with 20 nodes instead of 2. We know that we can cover all these things with reactionary cost optimization efforts. We can right-size the database cluster. We can commit to some committed use discounts or savings plans from the cloud providers. But there's got to be a better way than just looking at big numbers and trying to make them small numbers every 6 months. And this is what FinOps is all about, to make it better, to make the cloud a tangible, quantifiable, and strategic cost of doing business. Something that helps you to explain what all that cloudy goodness that we're using is bringing to the bottom line of your company, because that's, after all, why we've all got jobs. So this reactionary, low information position is, to me at least, a bit like standing at the gates of hell. It's a scary place that I want to get away from. What if you could get away from that place where no one knows and we're full of bill shocks and all that sort of stuff, and get to somewhere that's kind of like my favorite place, on a hammock, on a beach? It's nice weather. Right now in Germany, I'm really thinking a lot about that. It's my kind of paradise. This kind of paradise, in this case, this nirvana, is somewhere where you can not just understand the cloud costs, the cost of running all your different systems, but also being able to break it down into individual workloads and components, like front end or back end, production versus dev. And then not only see which app, but which components in that app are driving your costs. Looking at this example, we can see that there's a cost going up month on month for our web product, whatever that is. Now, rising cost could be a bad sign. But we've got another bit of information. This is actual business information from another system, the number of active users we've got. We can see that number rising as well. We can plot those and get a cost per customer, which now we can actually see is trending in the right direction. This means although our costs overall are rising, we're getting more efficient at servicing our users and hopefully making some money. And to that point, let's add in here our our revenue per user, right? This is what we're bringing in on a regular basis. And we can see here in this pink dotted line that at around 9 months, we've actually started to turn a profit on this product. Now, those could be dollars, those could be millions, they could be rupees, it doesn't really matter. The point here is that we can now see with this high-level metric what's going on with our business and whether we're making any money. As we extend the analysis, we can look at different components of our workloads. We can go deeper on those. We can get right down into transaction cost per database or something like that. But for the moment, we'll just keep it high level. Ooh, that shouldn't have animated yet. That's a little ahead. But anyway, we can take these metrics further in a couple of ways. The first one is budget. We can plan and budget accurately. So if we know, based on this metric that we've got, the cost per user, we know how much each user costs, we know how many users we're expecting to bring on each month, we have a marketing push coming next month, and we have an idea of how many new users we expect, well, then we can figure out how much revenue that's going to bring and how much cloud cost that's going to bear. Now, trust me, the finance team will be very thankful for that level of clarity when they've been trying to manage these bill shock situations for the past 6 months. We could take it a little bit deeper. We can plan and budget and evaluate our next feature. One example for that, a customer that I had was building a recommendation engine. And instead of blindly turning around and saying, this is going to cost us 10 grand a month, they were able to calculate how much it costs per recommendation, how much extra business each recommendation gives, percentage of how many people click it, the average spend per item in their basket. And then they can determine the success or failure of that new feature. And finally, we can do our optimizations based on data. If we optimize that front end or back end, whatever process it is, and we save some measurable time or money per transaction, then we can directly correlate that to the overall improvement in business performance. The thing is that once we're doing this with data, we're no longer blindly stabbing around our cloud bill, looking for a big number and trying to make it a small number. We're not looking for easy wins that we'll probably forget about, and 6 months from now, we'll have to do them again, like deleting old data from an S3 bucket or something like that. We're being intentful on what we're targeting, and we're having data drive our cloud spending decisions and measuring that impact on our customers and our business. So I want to show you how you can get here with something that we like to call, as I mentioned, intent-aware FinOps. Before I do dive into the actual intent-aware FinOps, I need to make a couple of very quick clarifications. The first one is FinOps is not cost optimization. They're not the same thing. Lowering cost is a part of it, but FinOps was never intended just to save money. FinOps is about more than decreasing the line items on a bill or downward trending dashboards. It's about context, like we spoke about. It's about asking not just what costs money, but why that money is being spent in the first place. It's about aligning the optimizations with the promises your architecture is making to the business: speed, uptime, security, compliance. Putting it simply, cost optimization is tactical, FinOps is strategic. Secondly, a little bugbear of mine, I see it all the time, FinOps is not short for financial operations. It is actually a portmanteau of finance and DevOps. That means the two words joined together. It probably would have been a little bit clearer to people if they used something like DevSec, Fin, something Ops, like everyone else. But in a similar vein to those names, it is meant to highlight the relationship between the technical and business teams. It's not meant to push everything on the financial operations team. Which leads to the last point, FinOps is for everyone. A lot of people think that, partly because of that name, that we're pushing it onto one team. But being strategic in nature means that we're also required to not just push it onto one team and not just focus on the people in the tech teams that are deploying the architectures and the code. This is a team sport, and we need buy-in from all across the business. We need especially executive leadership. We need finance people. And to do that, we really need to have some sort of a common language for people to speak. Finance people are about as interested, in my experience, in spot instances as developers are in asset amortization. Now, I don't know about you, but in that situation, I'm going to fall asleep pretty quickly once the finance teams get going. So we need to find some sort of common ground where we can talk about this stuff. Excuse me. And so that brings us on to the first of our 4 pillars of intent-aware FinOps, capturing context. We need to understand our cost. Sorry, just a quick side note. I did use Gen AI from Gemini to do all the little graphics on the right-hand side for the next few slides. They are dodgy as, but I thought they're funny and I just leaned into it. The idea here is to understand our costs, right? And to understand them in as much detail as makes sense. The gold standard is that we tie every single cost line of our cloud invoice to a business outcome. To start with, make sure we're doing the regular stuff like tagging and labeling our cloud resources, so we know which resource, which workload they belong to, and over time, we can build on that and go deeper. At a bare minimum, as you can see my little mini tagging structure here, I would need to see the workload name, you might use app or something else, and I would need the development stage or environment. I've got dev here, so Phoenix in dev. Optionally, you might want to add another component like front end or back end, or you could load that in to the app one as well. You could have Phoenix_front end. The more detail we can add there without getting too overwhelming for our developers, for our deployment people, the more we can break down our costs later. But on the other side, we don't want to go crazy. We don't want to go overboard. Okay. If we have to supply 500 tags to deploy an EC2 instance or a GCE compute VM, then we're just not going to get them done. Then we take those metrics, we combine them with our business KPIs, and we start tracking simple stuff, developing again as we go. We want to track things, for example, like number of users, business things, not cloud costs. We can, later on, we can combine them with those cloud costs to get a cost per user of the Phoenix backend in development, as this particular one might be. But in the start, we're really focusing on the business KPIs. And secondly, we want to interrogate intent. Now, this one's a bit of a big one. For every single resource running in our cloud, we need to know why it's there, and specifically why it's one in this configuration, right? We need to tie it to a business outcome. If it's not bringing value to the company, why are we running it, and why are we paying Amazon or Google or Oracle for it, or Microsoft or whatever? It could be a compliance requirement, right? That doesn't bring revenue, but it is a requirement. It is bringing some business value, if not revenue. Storing financial records according to the laws, 7 years or 10 years, whatever they are. We need to know why they're there, and we need to know what promise the resource is fulfilling. As we go through this and we do that interrogation, as we start looking with our magnifying glass into the motherboards there, we may find that no one remembers what that's there for, and no one knows why we've got it. It may be a historical situation or whatever, but if no one knows, that's a red flag. This might be something we need to remove, maybe. Okay, we never assume. We want to make sure. We don't want to delete production. That would be a good way to save costs, but it's not a good way to drive your business. Be ruthless in this situation, but also be blameless. Now, we're not going to start at the top of a list of a cloud invoice and walk through individual load balancers one at a time until we get to the ones that cost the most. I will go through a plan to review these shortly. I did want to share just a little example of this in action. I was working with a customer a while ago, and they had a database. They were backing up daily. In addition to the daily backups, they were taking hourly incremental snapshots and planning to use them for backup and recovery. Pretty quickly, without any lifecycle policies or management, they'd amassed almost a petabyte in backups, which, if you can do your maths, that's about 20K a month in whichever main cloud storage you use, as long as you're using the hot storage. 20K a month for backups seemed like a lot. A petabyte's a fair bit of data. And as we started talking about that, and I said, why have you got those backups? They were holding on to the hourly snapshots for months, for years. So why are they there? Oh, in case. In case what? An hourly snapshot from a single day a year ago doesn't help you. We turned out, when we looked into it, that the actual requirement, the business requirement, was that they maintain the last 30 days of daily backups, the last day's worth of hourly backups, and then put all the monthly backups in long-term storage. With that in mind, with the requirement for using those backups, a restore process. And the plan was to allow up to a week for the backup to occur, the restore to occur and the data to be available again. So pretty quickly we figured out we could delete all the hourly snapshots, we could delete most of the daily backups, we could keep those monthly backups. With a couple of changes into lifecycle policies, we moved the backups into cold storage like Glacier or deep storage tier in Google Cloud, and we were down to less than $100 a month. We have to know why it's there and what's bringing business value. And if we don't, then I'm sorry, we're going to be wasting too much money. Now, as I said, in my experience, to get the good results here, we need to be ruthless. We also need to be blameless. In the past, decisions have been made. We've all got tech debt. We all know about it. They're rarely made with ill intent. But once we know there's a better way, or once we know that what we've got is not fulfilling our promises, it's time to make some changes. The cloud changes at a rapid speed. The services, the features that are available mean that what you had before maybe no longer is the best way to do it. And in addition, your own app hopefully is getting more and more successful all the time. Your own, whatever you're providing, is getting better and more successful and having more usage. And so the amount of, or the design decisions that you made previously might not be the right ones anymore. If it needs updating, that's fine. Be ruthless and be blameless as you push forward with those. So once we're looking at our workloads, we're starting asking these questions, and we're realizing that as we're asking these very specific questions, we've found some good optimizations that are possible, and major and some are not. The knee-jerk reaction would be, I've got an oversized thing, I'm going to resize it. But I would please ask you not to do that. If we see, for example, that our database is peaking at 25% usage, or our Google Compute instance, or whatever it might be, it's peaking at 25%. So we could quickly drop it from a 4XL to an XL and be done. That would be one way forward, but it's not the best way for a few reasons. The first one is, as we start fixing our architectures and as we start looking for more problems, the load on our system will change. It's similar to when they clear a bottleneck in town planning. When they move a set of traffic lights and put in a roundabout, you find the next problem. And so we don't want to affect the systems too badly as we start making some of these changes. But maybe as we go through and improve the design, we realize things that we couldn't before. Maybe we can be more stateless than we were before. Maybe we can loosen the coupling. Maybe we can handle interruptions better. And in doing all the things, maybe we're coming better suited for an auto scaling where we weren't before, or using spot instances or something else that's more efficient. So now when we go back and look at that usage, yes, we are peaking at 25%, but that's peaking. And we're normally sitting at around 10%. So we can downsize even further and then only scale up to XL when we need it. Instead of being at 4XL, we're now down to a medium-sized instance that scales up once a month when the report run hits that peak. We will go deeper on this stuff shortly, but overall, looking at CPU and RAM is just not enough. So we do have to be really hunting deeply as we go and look for this design waste. And it's also important to notice that the changes are not only against the cost of the instance. I had a customer recently in the UK that made a mistake when they were pushing some stuff from dev into prod, and they left their logging levels on one of their modules set to debug instead of on info. They started burning literally thousands of pounds a day in CloudWatch logs. That wasn't affecting the container service, and it actually wasn't affecting the performance of the container. It was just spitting out logs, and AWS was taking care of it. They weren't aware of any of this stuff because they'd never seen costs on CloudWatch logs before, so they weren't monitoring it. So we did notice it, and we let them know, and that was all good. It didn't change the performance characteristics in a meaningful way, but thousands of pounds a day is pretty quickly 100 grand a month. So it's just an important message to keep an eye on the waste, not just in the architectures, but also in your application levels. Jumping on to the last pillar, optimize safely and document. Now, this is probably pretty self-explanatory, but we want to keep being deliberate as we optimize. We need to keep our KPIs in focus. We need to keep our system functioning, and we don't want to forget why we did something. This is important for the future when we realize that there's a better way, or maybe in case something goes wrong, right? And we're trying to fix it. We need to know why we were trying to improve, and then we can tackle it from that perspective. Just going to take a quick swig of tea. So those are our 4 pillars, and some pretty awesome beta we spoke about, the predictability and the data-driven optimization and business decisions. I think that you can see from all of that there's going to be a bit of work to get there. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that. Firstly, we go back to the FinOps foundation. Early on, they realized that all of this stuff was a lot of work, and they built some mechanisms to help us make it a bit more manageable. The first one is the FinOps phases. Deliberately an iterative cycle. We go through inform, optimize, and operate. Really briefly, we always start with inform. We can't optimize what we don't know. And as we try to manage our costs, we need to be able to see and understand what we're spending on, right? We mentioned the ability to provision in seconds really makes it easy to spend a lot of money. So awareness of the past and current trends, awareness of forecasts and budgets is really critical here. Once we can accurately allocate the spend based on whatever it is, business outcomes, tags, accounts, whatever it is, we can really focus in the right areas to optimize. Moving on to optimization, once we understand the costs, we take that data and we can decide what needs the most attention. Now, usually that's going to be the biggest line item on the bill, not always, but we can figure out from there how to improve it. Could be design changes, it could be an application layer thing, it could be right sizing or scaling. There's lots of other things. We do that all here. Then we come around to operate, which is not so much about operating the cloud environment, rather operating our business. We're continually evaluating our business KPIs that we spoke about earlier and reviewing the trends we see. When the optimization efforts impact our KPIs, for better or worse, then we've got an input for the next inform phase. We go around again and again. As we go around, we want to improve our FinOps maturity levels. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you that have looked at FinOps before will see I've taken one new logo with one old logo here. The old logo for crawl, walk, run is a bit dated, but it's much more explanatory than the other logo. So apologies to any FinOps hawks. As we move through the maturity phases, we're doing that iterative process, but we don't want to try and do everything at once. We want to start small. As they say in England, don't try and boil the ocean. We get some early wins, we build on that, we grow in scale and complexity, we do harder stuff. Taking a look at the output from those smaller actions can help us to work out whether we're doing things the right way and start making some more major changes. As we apply that maturity model to different parts of the framework, it is normal to see some parts moving faster than others. That's all fine, doesn't matter, it's completely normal. The reasons do vary. A lot of the time it'll be tech debt or specific skills in certain domains, or even a feature backlog, right? There are more important things to work on than this stuff sometimes. Don't be too worried about it, just keep making progress and keep driving it forward. The FinOps model does also go into a whole lot of other detail around domains and capabilities and all this sort of stuff. But I think we can boil that down a little bit more simply using this particular streamlined intent-aware FinOps. So we're going to skip those and just talk a little bit more about the way that we see being able to make some progress. The first one of those is baselining with business KPIs. Okay, this is essentially this FinOps inform phase, But we're not even looking at the cloud bill first. We start tracking KPIs on the business, and hopefully you already are. Then we can see the impact, if any, that the changes are having on the business, right? Without them, we're kind of slicing blindly and hoping we don't cut off our revenue streams. We start with simple KPIs like customer count or transaction rate. A funny story, when I worked at Amazon, the checkout rate was the holiest of all metrics. Not for cost, but it was the canary. If anything ever went wrong, let me put it a different way. If there was ever a sudden drop in that checkout rate, if it suddenly dropped by 50% or something, then that was a signal of possibly something very wrong. Now, at Amazon, they make thousands of pushes per day into production. That could have been one of theirs, or it could have just been just a DNS problem or something. It might not be something that specifically they caused, but it was a signal. They keep an eye on it. And they manage to these KPIs very, very strongly. So if you can make changes and optimize without ever causing a problem to your customer experience, then you're winning. That's a great thing. Remember, we're trying to tie every single dollar back to some measurable business outcome and eventually get down to things like transaction latency or query performance. And as we go deeper on those specific KPIs, we'll apply more to certain workloads, not others. For example, transactional query performance might be specific to a database, but it will roll up at some point to the overall cost per customer or cost per transaction or something along those lines. Moving on, we want to instrument everything. Like we've already said, you can't fix what you can't see. Now, we've already mentioned tags and labels. I won't go more deeply on there, but this is really where the technologists need to dive deep. We often take a brief look at a performance graph and see a system working at a nice, healthy rate. The CPU and the RAM look good, so it's fine. But actually, when we look into logs and traces, we see there's a lot of wastage there. One of my customers, database specialist, was working with a customer a few weeks ago, and they saw a database was pushing 85% IOPS. Now, that's pretty much in the sweet spot where you'd want it. The server was running fully utilized, looked nice, the RAM and CPU were good. As they dove deeper, they saw that every single query was doing a full table scan because 2 critical indexes were missing from one of the tables. So by fixing the workload, in this case, adding a couple of indexes, pretty quick and easy, latency on those queries dropped tenfold, and the database was able to be drastically downsized. Something that looked okay suddenly got far, far cheaper. So I encourage you, really go deep, push into APM traces, look at your database query plans, look at container logs, get into task level metrics. You might need some code level instrumentation here to say, this is what we're doing, and this is the time when this thing started, and this is when it ended, and it took this long. But as you look deeper into those, you will find out that a lot of the expensive problems, a lot of the big optimizations you can make are hidden somewhere inside these healthy looking utilization graphs. Nextly is the workload reviews. We review workloads because that's where it's really at. This is the stuff that is delivering value to our company. We need previous steps to make sure that we're keeping an eye on things and we're not breaking things as we optimize. But once they're in place, what we really need to do is look into the workloads. It's, if you will, the heartbeat of the whole thing. But we review a whole workload rather than components because the workload represents the business value. That's the interaction of those components as a whole is what's bringing us something. And when we focus on the overall workload, we can ensure the whole system is designed optimally to meet those promises. Of course, as we review, we're going to find out that there's performance problems or wastage or something, and we'll track that inevitably down to a single configuration, a single component somewhere. But we need to ask deep questions as we're doing this stuff. We need to look in and say, why does this job run nightly? What promise is this workload keeping? And if people don't know what it is, then this is a big red flag, like I mentioned earlier. This is something then that we need to maybe start challenging. Why is it there? We want to be curious, not blameful, okay? Before, like I said, ruthless and blameless. We want to ask people, why are we using expensive GPUs when cheap ones could do? Why are we running on Intel instead of ARM or whatever? Sometimes there will be genuinely good reasons that we can't switch to something else, and other times it might be something that's worth chasing down. The next one is to write it all down. Once you made a decision, write it down. Multi-AZ was done because we needed 99.9% uptime. When I was a kid, I worked at McDonald's, and a manager there told me that a short pencil beats a long memory every time. And now I wouldn't use handwritten notes on a piece of paper to write down about my architecture, but it is still true here. Okay, these notes won't ever be in dashboards. These things only live on in human memory. Or if they only live on in human memory, they will be lost at some point. Comment in a Terraform module, a commit message in a Git repo, even a Jira or Wiki entry if you have to. I personally hate documenting in there because it's another place I have to open when I'm looking for it. But these things will beat tribal knowledge every single time. It helps the next engineer, the next review, the next optimization to stay aligned with reality and not make assumptions as they go. Automation is obviously the key, for sure. But automation without intent is dangerous. We need to be done the right way. Think about your code pipelines, right? You automate integration tests, unit tests, end-to-end tests. You probably got canaries. You do some application monitoring, all that stuff to track errors. When you find a new problem, you both write a test and a fix to make sure it doesn't happen again. As we make optimizations at the application layer, they'll be caught in that. That's fine. But as we make changes to infrastructure, we need to add tests in for that as well to prevent making mistakes. If AWS had that in place in 2017, then we wouldn't have had the huge S3 outage that we did because some guy on a service team fat-fingered a command and shut down most of the HTTP hosts around the world. You didn't hear that from me. So we need to make sure that we automate, but we do it with policies in place. And those policies and guardrails should respect our SLAs and our compliance and our security rules. In fact, we could add some more tags in to help us do that, right? So if you added a tag in to say this particular storage location has a high security level, then you could add a rule in that says don't let a NAT gateway publish to the internet when I've got this security data, right? Or this important stuff. And in this situation, when we're automating and when we've got these guardrails in place, then sometimes we're going to have a problem. Okay, we're not perfect. We make a change, it affects our KPIs adversely. Okay, customer satisfaction's down. We see that order drop I spoke about, whatever it might be. Then we should be able to roll back or forward, whichever way your systems work, with confidence. We can fix it and move on. We don't need to set up a meeting and have a discussion. Someone doesn't need to be woken up and gotten out of bed. We can just go ahead and automate and move on. Finally, the last piece of this set of rules for moving forward is don't be afraid to do nothing. It sounds a bit silly, but we've all seen the false economy of spending hours working on something to save a few minutes or a few dollars. Right? Lord knows I've done it, whether it's from scripting something that doesn't need scripting to buying coffee machines that are on special that I don't need. When we talk about it with your own tech teams, it's clear that there needs to be an awareness of a bigger picture. Yeah, prioritize the big rocks, as they say. If the same effort that you would spend working on a feature, if the same effort would drive $100,000 a month in revenue from a new feature versus save $1,000 on fixing a batch job, obviously it's worth more to the company to spend that time on the new feature. Over time, if that $1,000 batch job gets worse and bigger and stuff, then yeah, sure, go and work on it. But make sure that you're aware of what's the big picture and where to spend your time. Intent-aware FinOps is really about those trade-offs, knowing when to pull the levers and when not, and what to focus and prioritize. So all of that, let me tell you about a little success story, a customer of mine. I've very shortened this description of this. I just used to have a whole 45-minute presentation on it. So hopefully I include everything. Please do throw up your hand if there are any questions. But I want to introduce you to a fake company or a real company that's name's been changed called Acme. You recognize they were at the gates of hell a year ago. They had all their teams and their cloud stuff. They had a really cool app. It was a great little startup, but their cloud was a total mess. Whilst their teams did own products, none of them were aware of their costs. Teams were spinning up expensive services. They didn't know what they were doing. It was a big old mess. Things were running. No one had any idea if they were running well. There was no monitoring in place. There was no objective measurement of anything. They didn't have KPIs. They didn't have success criteria, nothing. People were getting frustrated as their resources suddenly just disappeared when they were in the middle of working. They had dev resources in test accounts, they had test resources in prod accounts, they had all sorts of stuff going all over the place. They didn't have any monitoring tools. They didn't know what was going on with resources. Their bill was $300K a month, so it was, decent size. But they decided they were going to make it better. A new what was he, head of cloud, head of the technical director, whatever his title was, came along and started implementing some changes. Now, he followed the FinOps maturity model and phases, and none of this stuff happened overnight. But taking you through a really brief summary of it, they took the small wins and built on them. They first bought they were AWS, so they first bought some savings plans, started saving some money, realized that was cool, bought some reserved instances for their databases, realized that was cool. Realized they didn't know who owned what, so they started tagging and labeling stuff. And they found that when they did, there was a whole lot of stuff that was like running in accounts that they forgot to turn off, or they didn't know who ran them. And this is this wastage that we mentioned earlier. They got rid of it. They got rid of some redundant storage. It wasn't the same customer with the database from before, but similar idea. They used more cost-efficient resources and architectures. They spun up everything on ARM architecture because they all used MacBooks for the development. They had the M3 chips, M1 chips at the time. And they started scheduling their non-prod resources, so turning off dev environments on the weekend and stuff like that. Organized all their workloads to get more under control and stop people deleting them. And they made a few process changes. The first one was reporting, and this was a really iterative process. They ran a report, saw how much stuff was tagged. They had to go back, tag some more stuff, run a new report, add some more tags to the report, go back and forth until they got what they needed. But over time and as they went, they were able to understand a lot more about their costs and start apportioning them not only to workload, but also to a business value. And they started managing to budgets as well. Now, the first round of budgets was a joke. It was like, stick your finger in the air and say it was $20. But each month they realized that they could sort of guess at about 10% increase month on month. Sometimes that was right, sometimes not. They started getting better and looking at why is it increasing? And they got better and better at this. And over time, we're able to start managing towards those budgets, making more accurate forecasts and getting really some good value out of it. A year later, today, they're approaching this cloud nirvana. The product teams own their workloads, they own their costs, they're managing everything to their budgets. The finance teams are involved in making the cost allocation and budgeting and planning and decisions, and all those decisions are made based on the data. Everything's organized, tagged, everything looks nice. Auto scaling's done based on demand, so they're not paying for resources that they don't need. The dev and test on the weekend, all that stuff. They're still not done. They never got to the part of, diving into every single database and looking into every single set of logs and so on, but they made a lot of improvements. Their bill's now $100K a month. They brought that total cost down by 2/3, and they're in the hammock. They're having a happy time. This is a real customer. It is a real, I kept their names out of it because they don't want to be on there, but if you do listen to the DoiT podcast ever, you will hear we did an interview with them, a little company up in Denmark. Really briefly, to touch on how partners like DoiT with our tooling and others can help. Obviously, I work for DoiT. I'm not here to do a sales play, but I'm just going to really take you through a couple of things to help you speed up this journey. So DoiT started about, I think we're up to 13 years old now. And over that time, we've taken a lot of knowledge, a lot of muscle memory in helping customers get the most out of their cloud. This is sort of our service portfolio. It's primarily based around a couple of things, and that is our DoiT Cloud Intelligence for managing everything FinOps. It's backed by artificial, but it's primarily human intelligence. The core offering started with the Cloud Analytics. Let me get my pen out here. This Cloud Analytics at the top here, which is a SaaS product to help you track all your cost and usage across multiple clouds, getting into your tags, dividing up your costs, all that sort of wonderful stuff. It's basically, or it's close to real time. It's as close as AWS will let us get, and Google and Microsoft. But it really helps you with cost anomaly detection, all the other things you need to make sure that your cloud's running sweetly. In the context of today's discussion, one of the coolest features we released last year was Data Hub. Data Hub in the middle here helps you ingest extra data to give context to that data. So for example, context of today's discussion, as I said, that might be that number of active customers we're talking about, or the number of transactions we process. We can then represent that on the same graph and get a cost per whatever it is, cost per business outcome. And then finally, the key over on the right there, our people, human intelligence, everything has to have the word intelligence in it. Our people, we're fortunate enough to still be quite small and focus on highly skilled and experienced engineers for our support and consulting. We don't have frontline engineers. And a lot of that stuff that happened with my previous customer, that was because they came and said, how do we do this new thing? How do we use this more efficiently? How can we change this architecture? We talked around those with some of our cloud CREs and ended up being able to find some really good solutions. In summary, I've got here without a single question. I'm hoping everyone can still hear me. The whole idea of intent-aware FinOps is not about saving money, right? It's about demonstrating the value of strategic investment in the cloud. That will necessarily bring you to a way of saving money, but you can explicitly clarify and have accountability around every single euro you're spending in the cloud. It does make trade-offs explicit. We know we chose this instead of that, and there's a reason for it. We've documented it. We know about it. And then that means that as CTOs, you can all use that as a strategic lever to push everyone else around in the company and make sure you're getting what you need. That's me. I'm going to take a quick sip of tea and ask if there are any questions.
Yes, so very cool. Thank you, Sam. I would have a question if no one else has one. I didn't find a good place where I could ask him, so but maybe I missed it. But like for me, I think the main question that I always would have around that is, first of all, like what is FinOps? I think that's actually a good explanation to have, because I also always thought it was financial ops. But like where do you see the ownership in the best, like if you have like a FinOps plan and you want to get at it, obviously there needs to be someone that has ownership of that, right? But like, what do you think is like the best way to do ownership for FinOps?
I've seen a few people try a few things, and to be honest, the FinOps organizational foundation, whatever they're called, organization, one of the two, they have a prescriptive guide on this, and it seems to be the one that's the most successful in my experience too. That is, FinOps should be owned by a central team, ideally dedicated, depending on the size of your company, could be a virtual team, but it needs to be owned centrally and supported from both the top and the bottom. So we need executive buy-in, not necessarily executive membership on the team. People need to know that they're focusing on FinOps, but ideally you should have one or more people that are acting as that bridge between the different personas, the different teams, the different parts of your business to drive those FinOps conversations, to take responsibility for telling the other people. I mean, if I were a FinOps practitioner in a company, I'm not able to go and make the changes to the code to make the code better, but I'm able to identify where there's some wastage and help those people find out. So it's a collaborative role with a central ownership.
Then maybe a follow-up to that is, because how do you, I feel like as an engineer, I wouldn't say you hate that people get into your stuff, right? But I would say that there's also the barrier of getting the communication right on how to do that and how to optimize your stuff, because initially someone most likely put some thought into what current scale is, how to do, what the infrastructure and the architecture is. And I feel like that's also sometimes can be, if the person that's in charge of that can be, I say that,
Defensive?
Yeah, they can. I think that can be defensive, and then there can be arguments about it. And I think that's also like a big factor why sometimes FinOps just fails.
Yeah, I get your point. And I mean, the FinOps organization do a survey every year of it's a voluntary survey of people who think they do a lot of FinOps or are participating in the movement. And in those areas, you still see a lot of them are very early in their processes, and a lot of them are calling out exactly that. Getting people to actually take the actions is one of the hardest pieces. It's easy enough to see how much a thing costs. It's easy enough to take that cost and divide it by the number of customers and get a basic KPI. To really drive that efficiency needs, as I said, a couple of things. I would argue one point with you, and that is, or possibly agree, depending on the way you want to word it, but that is that engineers that are building products almost always are trying to do it in an efficient way. They don't want to just make the most bloated app they can. They want to do something that runs fast and is reliable and all that stuff. Over time, it may or may not still be fit for purpose. It may have had a few band-aids, but those original decisions, I'm sure, were very well intentioned. And I think that the tendency is to go for more sexy things after that, right? So why would I optimize this when I can just throw another hardware at it and go and work on this cool new feature instead of going back and look at that? That was old news. The only ways that I've seen that be successful is a little bit of carrot and stick. The carrot piece is interesting. The stick, of course, is just execs, right? But the carrot piece, things like gamification, things like setting teams up against each other. In the example there of Acme, they actually had these cloud guild meetings where they would all get together and talk about the latest challenges. And one of the teams got up and said, "We did a thing and it was really cool." Yeah, and they made some experiment and used, I think it was the processors, and they saved some money, and it kicked off this kind of game amongst the other developers to see who could do the coolest thing. And they didn't always win. They made some really big mistakes. I don't know if any of you have heard of Aurora Serverless from AWS. It's a version of the Aurora database which scales to 0. It's really, really bad when you start up the latency. When you first get a cold start, it's really slow. But they tried it in production, and it was a horrible mess. But they got up and they told the story, and everyone had a laugh and a learning and moved on. And that, I guess, blameless but also boasting sort of, hey, this is the cool thing we did, that really drove people to be more interested in trying to make their stuff better. The stick part, again, using an example from my own career at Amazon, every team is required to spend 10% of their time trying to make everything they do cheaper and more efficient. Now, that doesn't mean that every month they're going to bring the cost down by 10%. That means that they're going to try, and out of a 2-week sprint, they're going to spend 8 hours per person trying to make that more efficient and better. There are a few different ways to achieve it. None of them are easy, and none of them are successful first go, that's for sure. But when it means that people are getting more money, when it means that a company is more successful, hopefully the staff can share in that and be proud of it. I do see it getting some drive in some direction.